4x4. This 4x4 is driven by Grahame Dixie, Executive Director of Grow Asia. The 4x4s are 4 expert viewpoints with 4 minutes to share their views. What role do you think that governments can play in ensuring that investment in agriculture is impactful and profitable?
Governments are part of the solution. And one of the things that they generally overlook is that they are very keen, in many situations, to encourage foreign direct investments. And they have one-stop shops set up to encourage this particular process. What the science tells us and the research tells us is that if you want someone to be a responsible investor, the thing that all attempts at being responsible fall out of the window the moment they start losing money. And the results also show that typically the people who do make a profitable and an economically sustainable business out of this are people who are experienced investors. They have deep pockets. They have a very clear idea of the market opportunities that they're trying to fulfill. They understand and consider the investment they're making as a long-term one. It's not a short-term one. That if you want to attract better investors, treat the existing investors well. And that will itself be the best advert to bring in a better investor. And then to get down to the sort of details of then having screened out the rubbish, and you're now working with some interesting ones. There is the risk issue, and for a part of that screening process to look to see whether they have an investment which has some foundation that it's going to work, that this crop has been grown already, the yields are sufficiently high for it likely to be profitable, that they may have done it similarly, that they're repeating a business model that they've used elsewhere. Then the next step is really that there are some pretty good there are a lot of guidelines around. I mean, what we see from the private sector is they're confused by the number of standards and operating processes that people are encouraging, but they come down to more or less the same things. There's only so much that you can do. You need to consult, you need to have a grievance mechanism to be able to ensure that the investor commits to carrying through on those particular processes without being too doctrinaire about exactly what they do, because they need a bit of flexibility when they're faced with the realities of the market or the realities of what the ground actually is able best to do. Some of those principles are being mandated and turned into legislation, but it is interesting looking back. So in Southeast Asia, when CDC first introduced the oil palm, they had the wit and wisdom to say, that's fine, you can introduce oil palm, and we've got sufficient evidence that we can get much higher yields than West Africa, so we're in a good position. But we do insist that, and it varied a bit between countries, that 20 to 40% of your raw material supplies comes from our growers. So that there is a piece there which can mandate the way they operate does make a difference. Because what we've seen with the oil palm operators is when they've gone back to West Africa, they haven't carried it forward. They've gone back to the larger state idea. So those are some of the things that governments can do to encourage better investing, find a better investor, not expose people to too much risk, follow some pretty good standards. And if you're confident enough, you can mandate them to involve smallholder farmers.
What are the policies and practices that would indicate that a government is treating agricultural investors well?
Well, the anathema for an investor is if the goalposts keep moving. So that what really encourages an investor is a government that is very clear on the rule of law. And so that's one of the kind of core pieces. So that, they don't want rules to be suddenly changed, or new ways of operating coming in, or people being too onerous around particular things, or suddenly the moment you come in, the tax rules changes. So that the local, the international investor wants to know that the deal that he does to begin with is going to be firm for a period of time. He doesn't want it changed. I should actually add something here, which I think is important, that one of the difficult points is that when local investors find that foreign investors are given much more preferential treatment, or they're both looking for the same outcome, that is a difficulty that needs to make sure that actually that playing field is relatively even. And the reason why I say this with a fair degree of confidence was a conversation that one of our close partners in Grow Asia was the Minister of Trade and Investment in Indonesia, who came from a high-level consulting background, and he'd tried this. They'd been trying to attract foreign direct investments into Indonesia and weren't having much success, so that he put out this storyline that let's treat our existing investors better. And within 6 months of that, he'd seen a tick up in local investments, in international investments coming in there. So that we have practical experience of that actually happening, and that by treating them well and respectfully and not moving the goalposts too much, but being seen to be a pretty safe pair of hands, but considered, and not too slow and not too bureaucratic are the kind of issues that definitely encourage a foreign investor.
Why is Grow Asia so successful?
What is different about Grow Asia is that we work regionally, that we have 6 country partnerships. If you had 6 individual countries, you'll probably have the normal breakdown. 2 of them would be brilliant, 2 of them would be adequate, 2 of them would be failing. But by cross-pollinating the learnings between them, we build up their skills. And one of the key skills is, how do you get those dialogues to happen? And here we apply, that aphorism, you manage what you measure. So they form, we have actually more like 580 partners now, and they form working groups around particular topics, mainly around value chains. When we measured the measured capacity of these working groups, we found them to be very variable. So a score out of 5, the best were 4.2 and the lowest was 0.4, and the average was 2.2 out of 5. In other words, they were failing. But you won't get that, because actually if you put Corteva and Bayer in the same room with a farmer cooperative and the Minister of Agriculture, they've never sat down and had this conversation before. And occasionally you'll get some exceptional characters who would champion a working group and make it happen, but mostly they didn't know how to do it. And so by distilling what is in business practice called the positive deviance, it sounds a bit weird, but actually to find what were the characteristics of the successful working groups, and then to disseminate that work to the working groups. Because what we saw was a correlation between the measured capacity of a working group and their results. And there is another aphorism, which is whatever you attend to, you get more of. And we have always focused on results, and results at scale. There's no point, changing the lives of 200 farmers. It's interesting, but it's not important. What's important is to really change the lives of thousands of farmers. And that leads us on to 2 other things. One is, we're a service organization. So we ask people, the sector and the partners, why do you join Grow Asia? What are your priorities? And they say, number 1, it's to learn. We don't want to make expensive mistakes. We want to learn from one another. Number 2 is to find like-minded partners who we can work with. And number 3 has changed a bit. It was initially, we want a collective voice in the policy dialogue. The fourth, the one that is now number 3, is actually they like to sense that they're part of a partnership which is making a difference. In other words, something that gives them a sense of purpose beyond what they do. And I think it's that kind of combination. And by having measured results, it gives us the credibility, because everybody wants to advise the government about policies. If you want to change policies, you need to be credible, and actually having measured field results on the ground gives you that credibility. So it's out of that the ASEAN ministers said, we want guidelines for responsible investing. Can you help us make that happen? That they said, the fall armyworm has arrived in Asia. Can't we deal this regionally rather than individual countries? When we spoke to different partners, across the region and said what would truly make a difference to the relationship between agricultural enterprises and smallholder farmers. They scratched their heads and then they said digital, and went into details about digital. And then they said, the goalposts are moving so quickly, we can't really keep up with what the technology. So by creating a learning process around what were the critical things coming through in the digital sector, and then finally in COVID, that actually to be able to use Zoom like this to bring in partners from all the different sectors all across the region, focus them on particular topics, which was first mile connectivity, what was the impact of mobile money, the massive expansion in digital marketing platforms, and the needs for investment. It gave the credibility that that by getting the collective wisdom of that disparate group, you could come up with smarter decisions. So it's essentially, if you can get that conversation to happen, you can and do make better decisions. But the core thing is this: you need to have all of those partners agreeing on the definitions of success. And there are many things that you can never get them to agree about. GMOs would be one. So we apply a thing called the 60-40 rule, which is probably about 60% of the topics you can talk about, 40% you never do, because you'll just get disagreement.
What skills are required to facilitate investment?
Sustainable Development Goal 17, which essentially says unless we do bring disparate parties together and coordinate them in some sort of loose cooperation, we have no hope of making the kind of changes that the world needs at the scale and in the time available. We do find that in terms of donor support and support from the private sector, they're much keener to invest in individual projects, whether that's responsible investing, whether that's the digital program, whether it's the gender, etc. But the glue that sticks it together is an enduring problem to get funded for that, particularly in today's environment with COVID. Then if you get into the detail of it, the study that was carried out of the different working groups to learn what were the positive deviants came out with multiple kind of lessons. And some of them, a lot of them are practical. You often find that in a successful organization or a working group, is that you have a two-person team. You need somebody that's charismatic, that can bring people in, is a leader, can get excitement to go on, and you need a clockwork person who books the room, who writes the minutes, and actually when you get those two people to work together, then it creates a professionalism and it creates a balance. So you don't want everything which is harum scarum and lots of new ideas but no practicality, but you do need to make things work well, and people like to sense that they're part of an organized piece. We found that it was a disadvantage to have one leader because they keep changing. And once they change, you get a hiatus and nothing happens. So we've been encouraging groups to form a joint leadership. They often had difficulty actually coming together about what they would agree on and setting out what the roles and responsibilities actually were. And sometimes they need some support from an external consultant who articulates for them the disparate pieces into something which is a business case for all of them. Nestle wanted an extra 10,000 tons of coffee coming out of Indonesia. The farmer organizations wanted the profitability of their farmers to be increased. And so those two different ideas came together as how do we increase productivity? And we put together an extraordinary number of partners. I mean, in that case, 17 different partners were working together. But it was interesting to see how a development agency would probably try and put all 17 people in the room at the same time and waste everybody's time. They broke them down into discrete units. The two or three organizations which were interested about productivity, the ones that were interested in certification, the ones on microfinance and digital finance, etc., and coordinated their supplies. So there is a way of getting lots of people to work together, but you need to be quite smart about it, and they need to basically come together and agree that this is what they needed. If you look at development projects, you will find that probably 60% of the factors that you control in a development project are determined by the quality of the management. And therefore, when you've got skilled managers that have the emotional IQ to be able to bring together a discussion between 3 or 4 different sectors that hitherto have not met before, it takes a pretty special person to do that, but we're learning how to do it better.
Visit the event page of the CASA website to see recordings of other expert viewpoints shared in the CASA 4x4s and webinar series.